father was murdered by the Cossacks. He saw an elderly woman being attacked, and he went to try and help her, and they shot him.
The western territories of the Russian Empire in the aftermath of the revolution is absolutely catastrophic. You have the collapse of power. Every group in the population is threatened. No one is safe.
It was 1921, before Hitler, before Stalin. They lived in the most dangerous of times, in the most dangerous of places, and they were just vulnerable children.
Things were very hard there.
I was an animal, I wasn't a human being.
We were the lucky ones. I don't know why.
One man made it his mission to save them.
To bring our children, put himself into danger. He was much more than just an ordinary man.
He was a great man.
Ordinary monthly meeting, the General Committee of the Cape Town Jewish Orphanage, 8th August 1920. Mr. Isaac Ochberg in the chair. Russian Jewish Orphans. The chairman explained that owing to the war and pogroms that were taking place in Eastern Europe, a large number of Jewish orphans were left destitute. He felt strongly that South African Jewry should do something for these unfortunate children.
By 1920, more than 10 million people in Russia had perished from 6 years of war, famine, and disease. 1 million children were without mothers or fathers. But one group of these orphans, numbering as many as 300,000, were especially at risk. For they were Jews. This is the story of how a businessman at the other end of the world turned his belief that something must be done for these children into action. As a 17-year-old immigrant from Russia, he'd arrived in Cape Town in 1895, penniless and unable to speak English. 4 years later, he was a British citizen. Within 10 years, he was a successful entrepreneur, and by 1920, his business interests, which stretched from ship salvage to property development and cinema ownership, made him one of South Africa's wealthiest men. This was Isaac Ochberg.
We called him Daddy because to most of our children, he was the only daddy they ever knew.
We ran to him, Daddy Ochberg, Daddy Ochberg.
It took him 3 hours to walk up the stairs. One child would pull at his little finger, the other one would pull at the jacket, the other one would pull at his trousers. He just couldn't move.
He was a larger-than-life character. The very first time I sort of saw him through other people's eyes was when I was at school, and the librarian called me over and she was sobbing and said, "I've just read your grandmother's book," and I was so moved.
Uman, a city in southern Russia near the Black Sea. Uman, the birthplace of Isaac Ochberg in 1878. Uman, like most everywhere in the Russian Empire, a place where to be Jewish meant you lived with the word pogrom ringing in your ears. It's an ugly word, pogrom, an ugly word for an ugly act. In its original Russian, it means outrage or havoc. But for more than a century now, in English, a pogrom has come to mean an organized, deliberate attack on a minority, often Jews. For Isaac Ochberg, this wasn't just a matter of words. He knew about pogroms firsthand. In 1881, when young Isaac was 3, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, and it sparked a wave of pogroms wherever Jews lived. "88-year-old Sissy Harris is one of the last surviving Ochberg orphans. As a 2-year-old, Ochberg found her and her 2 elder sisters in the Ukrainian town of Kostopol. She returns to the place of her birth for the first time.
I'm clinging to my elder sister, and we were probably all crying. And my grandmother said that she couldn't bear to watch us go because she'd never see us again. So good and kind, but she couldn't bear to see us go off in the train.
Half the world's Jews, more than 5 million souls, lived in Russia at the start of the 20th century, a time when anti-Semitic feelings reached near hysterical proportions in the Pale of Settlement, that curiously named part of the Tsar's empire, from the Baltic to the Black Sea, where Jews were permitted to live. Cape Town could not have been further removed from events in Russia. These are Isaac Ochberg's reckonings of his wealth in 1905. For this 27-year-old, self-educated immigrant kept impeccable records of every pound he earned and spent. Had he stayed in his native Russia, things would have been very different, for 1905 was a terrible year to be Jewish. In Odessa, one of the worst pogroms of all took place. Militant right-wing agitators enlisted hooligans and criminals, and aided and abetted by sympathetic police and military officials, they went on a ferocious rampage of death and destruction. Over 4 days in October, they killed 500 Jews and wounded thousands more, leaving families ruined and desolate. Clara Rykova was a 1-week-old infant.
Когда происходил погром ужасный в Одессе, еврейский погром, мне было 2 недели. Наша семья была 13 детей, и закрылись в ванной комнате наглухо, потому что квартиру громили, все разгромили, мебель повыбрасывали через окна со 2-го этажа на улицу, вспороли перины и подушки, летели эти перья.
A meeting of the Executive Committee of the Cape Town Jewish Orphanage was held in Mr. Ochberg's office on 19th August 1920. It was now necessary to obtain funds for providing for the orphans when they were brought out. Mr. Ochberg suggested that a sum of £10,000 should be raised by the relief fund.
Эти время всегда страшно. Не только тогда, всегда страшно. А тогда особенно. Вот, потому что мы прятались, вот я лично, наша семья, среди русских, среди украинцев, среди соседей. Или уходили куда-то далеко из дома. Конечно, было страшно. Что за вопрос?
А почему они вас ненавидели?
Потому что мы были евреи.
Ну, а вербную неделю при царизме, я вам говорила, нельзя было выйти на улицу. потому что без разбора вербой хлестали по ногам и кричали: «Бей, жида, бей, бей, не робей». Это я на себе испытывала и помню. Антисемитизм был при царизме ужасный. Ужасный.
Anton Chematsky once almost married a Jew, in spite of being raised by his mother with fiercely anti-Semitic prejudices.
Говорю, такой не было. Пламенной любви к евреям не было. Это своим порядком. Потому что еврей был хорош тогда, когда деньги давал. Здесь легко. Распишись, деньги дает. Это ж приятно, если не без труда. Распишись только. А он дал вексель. Вексли, вы знаете, что такое вексли. Но если вы знакомы с векселями, там было достоинством 50, 100, 200, 300 злотых. Но а он берет 100, а вексель подписывает на 300. Вот. Ну, так он был приятный, хороший еврей. Ну, потому что деньги дал, сразу распишись только. Ну, а что там, трудно расписаться. И можно выпить, можно закусить и все. Потом этот сам еврей делается истуканом таким, понимаете, что с ним жить нельзя. Он требует давать деньги, а денег этих нет. Ну, тогда ненависть.
As Isaac Ochberg knew so well, relations between Jews and non-Jews in Russia were at best ambivalent, or at worst, driven by outright hatred. The peasants viewed Jews as aliens. Their religion, language, food, clothing and customs were all different and mysterious. Gregory Nestor is the oldest person on earth.
Перейшов до нас, люди просять, він дивиться, або щось заробив з нього, або щось купив, а не за своє йому продав, і от таким ще займали.
Вони були без землі, вони жили з торговлі.
Як ви ставились до них?
До жидів?
Так.
Не любила, бо вони вміли обманювати, бо треба якось прожити.
Вот волки, они необходимые, понимаете, в охотничьем хозяйстве. Но если их много, так уже никуда не годится. Один-два волка, это надо, необходимо просто. Но так само евреи. Евреи, он необходим просто в селе, если село большое. Он необходим, потому что хочешь водки, допустим, купить. Он не торгует водкой, он не имеет концессии, ничего. Но если к нему подойти, так у него всегда бутылка две найдется.
A special meeting of the General Committee of the Cape Jewish Orphanage took place on the 22nd of August 1920. The chairman gave a full report of his work in connection with bringing over the destitute Jewish orphans from Eastern Europe. He also stated that he had attended a large public meeting of the Cape Relief Fund for Jewish war victims.
The world from which Isaac Ochberg wished to rescue orphans in 1920 was a hellish place. More than 3 million Russians had died during the First World War. Then, in 1917, had come the revolution, and in the civil war that followed, at least as many again were killed. While everyone was equally vulnerable, one group was surely more at risk than all the others. Revolution and civil war had already made for a lethal cocktail, but when it was both shaken and stirred with superstitious beliefs about Jewish customs, Jews could so easily be seen as fair game for any wandering Cossack with a grudge.
Ну, потому что евреи, понимаете, употребляют христианскую кровь в мацу, понимаете, вот, ну. Ну, так это ж, ну, послушайте, и потом как они добывают эту кровь? Они добывают эту кровь в бочку, набивают гвоздей и бросают эту жертву в бочку и катают. Ну, так я себе раздумал, что если бросить какого-нибудь мальчишку или кого-нибудь в бочку с гвоздями и катать ее так вот, так там будет больше отходов, чем крови. Так я спрашивал матери, как же ж так? Так там же не только кровь, там может быть и кал, и мочь, и все, что хочешь, там может быть больше. Ну, получил подзатыльник, ничего, уходи к черту, раз не понимаешь. Ну и все, ну и кончено. Весь разговор кончен.
Що казали про цей час тоді?
Ну так казали, якщо я кажу. Ну, що значить лють людську кров. А я вам так кажу, але я не докажу, бо не знаю. Ну так проговорали люди. Ну для чого, щоб влить у ту мацу, як то вони казали. Ті коржі. Ну, значить, за людську кров. Я і вірила, і не вірила, бо я ж не бачила. Да не бачила. Воно так проговорали.
With beliefs such as these, little wonder that Jews were easy meat for the marauding bands of soldiers that were ravaging the countryside in the anarchy that was the west of the former Russian Empire in 1920. Retreating Germans, aggressive Poles, Ukrainian nationalists, the Red Army and White Russians, all of them indulged in anti-Semitic attacks at one time or another. No one will ever know the exact numbers, but between 100,000 and 150,000 Jews were killed at this time. Another 50,000 or so Jewish women were raped, and as many as 1 million Jews were directly affected in some way by pogroms. While all civilians were at risk in these troubled times, only Jews were killed simply for being Jews.
I was born in 1908. And in the First World War, I can tell you they were bitter years, but the Russian Revolution was terrible.
Все власти были слабые. Одна была, они были почти одинаково вооружены. Понимаете? Они менялись часто, конечно, менялись. Вот. Мы иногда ложились спать при одной власти, а встали утром, уже другая власть.
Our house was opposite a Russian military barracks. We had a cow, we had milk, we had cheese. We used to beat the sheaves to get the corn out, so we had plenty of food. Father was a shoemaker. He was a master at it. He was a quiet, peaceful fellow. He never interfered with anybody. It all started on a Friday night. We were playing in an open ground. There was a sandy patch. And one of the officers caught hold of one of the little boys. You can just imagine how old we were, 5, 6 years of age. And he grabbed him by the neck, he took out his sword, and he was showing us I was going to cut his head off. And his head under his... and the mother saw it. Yeah, I remember it. She was never the same again. I heard they shot my father. He was hiding on top of a shul. They took him into the barracks, shot him on the spot. There was no argument. They buried him in a shallow grave.
Before I was born, my father was in the Polish army, and he came to visit my mother over a weekend. And whilst they were sitting talking in their room, there was a noise outside. And my mother said to my father, "Go and have a look, what's happening outside?" He went to have a look, and he saw an elderly woman being attacked by the Cossacks, and he went to try and help her, and they shot him. While he was lying there, my mother went out to see what was happening, and she found him dying on the ground. She was then about 6 months pregnant with me, and he died in her arms, and that was the end of him.
This park, where a brand new church is now being built, was once the Jewish cemetery in Kostopol. It's been obliterated. Sissy Harris's father and mother are buried somewhere here. When Sissy was born, 3,500 Jews called this town home. Now there are just 19.
My father had been in the Russian army, and he learned to read and write Russian. And when he came back, the people wouldn't let him come to the synagogue because he could read and write Russian. They said he wasn't a Jew anymore. And he decided to move to Kostopol and started a synagogue on his own.
This was the site of that synagogue founded by Sissy's father. The Soviets flattened it in 1946. But by then, Hitler had also done his bit for the Jews of Kostopol and elsewhere.
Read the Russian Orphans. The chairman thanked the meeting for the confidence they showed in him by leaving the matter entirely in his hands. At the same time, he wished to remind them that they were taking upon themselves a difficult task, and he hoped that everyone would put his shoulder to the wheel and unite in doing their utmost for this cause. As to who should proceed to England to bring out the children, the feeling of those present were that the chairman should go himself. The chairman said it would be a great sacrifice for him to go, but if no one else would come forward, he would do so. Applause.
These are some of the men responsible for the most frightful crimes imaginable. Between 1917 and 1921, more than 1,400 pogroms took place in what is now Ukraine, Belarus and Poland. One of the bloodiest was the 1919 Pogrom massacre. In the early part of that year, the town was controlled by Cossacks, loyal to the Ukrainian nationalist leader Simon Petluria. The local commander was a syphilitic psychopath, Ataman Semyshenko. At precisely 2 p.m. on February the 16th, 1919, the Jewish Sabbath, Semyshenko unleashed his troops on Proskurov's unsuspecting Jews. Naum Gaivika was there.
Там, где мы жили, по Соборной переулке, во дворе этот самый день была стрельба, страшная стрельба. И вот и трое петлюровцы заскочили и в этом переулке. Двое заскочили к этому, был там Янкель Маранц, известный этот слесарь, у него трое ребята были, и дочка была, вот я правильно говорю. Вот, они туда зашли, они, наверное, он, наверное, им дал много денег, не слышно было стрельба, не слышно было, значит, не убиты. И заскочили к нам один петлюровец, вот, мне было тогда сколько, 7 лет. 7 лет. Один, значит, петлюровец зашел и вынул клинок, он сказал по-украински: «Я зараз вам голову сниму совсем, дайте золото и бриллианты. Что это за золото и что за бриллианты, даже не видели. И вот, и труба затрубил, и затрубил трубач сборы, и он плюнул, я помню, и этот самый клинок положил в себя в футляре, и так мы живы остались.
1,600 Jews were killed in 3 hours in Proskurov that day, 1/10 of the town's Jewish population. Proskurov became the iconic pogrom of collective Jewish memory. But there was another image that also flowed through the consciousness of Jews, like Isaac Ochberg in the 1920s. For where there are soldiers plundering civilians, there is an age-old tradition: rape.
Хозяева этого маленького домика, у них была дочь лет 20, может быть 18, красивая высокая девушка. Возле большой печи стоял топчан. Они всех нас загнали на топчан. У топчана была сбоку к стене ниша. И мама моя затолкала нас, 2 детей. Сестренке было 6 лет, мне 11. Ну, мы из-за этой щели выглядывали или выползали, пугали нас, видели, что ничего нет. Тогда они занялись девушкой. Она сидела они ее раздели догола. Стояла там скамья, деревянная скамья длиной, может быть, 1,5 метра. Они ее посадили верхом на эту скамью и стали тыкать ей нагайками в груди, в тело, в бока, прочее. Она молчала. Она не плакала, не кричала. Они тыкали ей туда своими нагайками. Потом, очевидно, уже не выдержав, схватили ее и затащили в соседнюю комнату. Мать и отец упали на пол, царапали дверь пальцами, стонали. Они знали, что там происходит. Я, конечно, в свои 11 лет не мог догадаться, что они делали. В городишке стало известно о том, что все девушки, которые были изнасилованы. Были изнасилованы и молодые женщины, причем на глазах у мужей, на глазах у родителей. Их насиловали.
For the lost children of this country, beset first by war, then revolution, disease, famine, and finally pogroms, life hung by a slender thread that could be broken at any time. The lucky few found themselves in orphanages, funded with foreign aid. Others roamed the streets and countryside like feral creatures.
On the way, I died of cold. You see my ears? There's still frostbite from those ears. I can't get it to heal. Both ears. They're practically burnt away from the cold. And I cannot remember for the life of me what happened. How the hell I joined the crowd again and I landed in Vladimir. Absolutely on my own. I went knocking on the doors looking for food. Only food. I slept in a house on the floor with grain bags. You know, just anything, anywhere to sleep. I defecated where I slept. I'm so scared. I was an animal. I wasn't a human being.
There must have been thousands on the train, hanging on the doors and the windows, all over, on top of the train and under the train. It was winter and the frost must have been anything between 20, 25 degrees below zero. If you put a cup of boiling water in a second, it becomes a block of ice. No clothes, no shoes. We had to cover our feet with a piece of rag.
I had 2 sisters who died from typhoid fever and 3 brothers. The younger one went out and he never came back.
Do you remember anything about the death of your parents?
I thought it was my parents because it happened around where I was living, and it appears that they died on the same day. And there was a room full of mourners. That frightened me, and they were saying a prayer, terrible, a room of sobbing people. So I was thinking that it could be my mother and father. But I didn't stay too long in that room because I started crying and I was taken out.
My father and brother Jack contracted dysentery. There were no doctors in the village. The nearest hospital was in Rovno. Jack, being young, fortunately pulled through, and my father was too weak. They had no medicine. They had nothing there. It was such a poor area. There were days when Mother would wake up Jack and Lise in the morning and send them into the forest to look for, I think you call it sway, the leaves. And if she found them, then we would have breakfast. And if she didn't, then we didn't.
How did your mother pass away?
She must have died of hunger. She was very thin, and she was always caring for the children. And there wasn't enough food.
As you were so small, do you have any of your own memory of your parents at all?
No, nothing at all. I remember Lisa crying, who's going to look after Gisela? But she was crying so bitterly, I suppose I couldn't forget that.
The chairman asked for leave of absence to proceed to Europe to fetch the first batch of orphans. Mr. Weinberg moved that leave of absence be granted. Reverend Walt seconded the motion and wished the chairman a safe voyage and speedy return with the children. In Mr. Gardner's opinion, this matter was treated too slightly. The chairman was going at great personal sacrifice and inconvenience, and he hoped the special gentleman.
On March the 18th, 1921, Isaac Ochberg left Cape Town by sea for Europe. He lingered in London and Paris for a while, but by June 4th he had set up his headquarters in Warsaw, and in the 2 months that followed, he engaged in a frenzied series of trips, collecting his orphans. Brest, Pinsk, Rovno, Sani, Lvov, Kovel, Kamenka-Shirsk, Kostopol. He visited them all by train, by truck, by car, and by wagon. Before he even set out, though, he made one very shrewd move. The American Jewish charity, the Joint Distribution Committee, had been active in the region for some years, and Ochberg took care to enlist their aid. In fact, most of the towns where he gathered the children had orphanages funded by the Joint, though later he seemed loath to spread the glory and acknowledge their crucial role in his mission. In Warsaw, he started from scratch, and with the help of a formidable matron, Regina Engel, he created a temporary holding orphanage in Sliska Street. Once they arrived there, the children were fed daily in Mrs. Engel's nearby restaurant. Out in the country, though, there's no denying that Ochberg had set himself a tremendous task in a land traumatized by war, with a shattered transport system and little or no infrastructure.
A person traveling in Eastern Europe in the period of the Civil War and right after it is first of all going to encounter people in incredible need. He's going to see lots of people on the move, lots of refugees, and in those areas where you have big settlements of refugees, he's going to find hunger, he's going to find disease, very, very common in this area. It's just going to be huge amounts of concentrated human misery.
At 10 a.m. on Monday, June 6th, Ochberg left Brest in Belarus for Pinsk, 100 miles away. The journey took him 20 hours. There he met the director of one of the 3 Jewish orphanages, a 28-year-old political radical with an eye for adventure, one Alexander Bobrov.
As a man, my father was rather dignified, very able to make contact with people, very warm. In fact, he had a great gift of friendship, I would say. He didn't care at all about material things, about ownership, about money. In fact, he rather disapproved of that. So he would have been a great contrast to Ochberg.
For all their differences, Bobrov threw himself into Ochberg's project, and the Pinsk orphanages eventually sent 36 children with the man from Africa. What's more, Bobrov himself abandoned his Pinsk responsibilities and decided to accompany Ochberg and the orphans on the journey.
It was his first act of rebellion, of being himself, of not doing what everybody wanted of him, but to do what he wanted to do.
Bobrov wrote to his parents to tell them that their favorite son was leaving forever.
It's a postcard that he wrote and left the night before he left Pinsk. It's dated the 20th of July. My dearest parents, forgive me if I have caused you heartbreak. Do not worry that I am going away, for I am traveling on a great and important mission. I hope I will still be able to repay you for all the good things you have done for me. Have no regrets over your son, who holds you dear to his heart. What is interesting, he never gave it to them, but he put it underneath the chenille tablecloth on the dining table, with the intention that he knew that on the Sabbath evening they took that tablecloth off and spread a white tablecloth, and they would have found it, and they did.
Bobrov did indeed repay his parents, with interest. 12 years after he left Pinsk, he paid for his surviving mother and his sister and her family to join him in Cape Town for a safer, more secure future, away from Hitler and his Aryan dreams of a Jew-free Europe. As for the orphans Bobrov left behind in Pinsk, many wrote their former director farewell notes, telling him how much they would miss him. But unlike the Ochberg orphans, the fate of these children will never be known. Did they live? Did they die? Did they have children of their own? And if so, what became of them? For the Ochberg orphans, the process of selection seemed quite arbitrary. The South African government had made strict rules supposedly governing who Ochberg was permitted to bring. Both parents must be dead, siblings must not be separated, and no child over 16 could be included. Ochberg ignored them all. Sissy Harris had 2 brothers who got left behind, while her eldest sister, Lisa, was over 16. Ochberg simply transformed Lisa into a nurse, and all 3 sisters made the journey. Charles Migdal was living in one of the Pinsk orphanages and showed remarkable ingenuity to get on Ochberg's list, though he ended up leaving one of his brothers behind.
He came and he interviewed me, and he said to me, "How did my parents die?" Well, I didn't know what he actually meant by it. So I said, well, they died a natural death. They wouldn't take us. So I said to my brothers, "Come, let's go after them. They won't know who they took, who they didn't take." I said, "Come, let's go after them."
Fanny Lokic had lost both her parents by the time Ochberg chose her and her brother to make the journey from Russia to South Africa.
He took a fancy to me, and he says, "Would you like to come?" I said, "Yes." And I said, "I've got a brother," because I was younger than my brother, and I wanted my brother to come so that he can look after me. Oh, my brother was so pleased that I was with him, and I was pleased that he was there.
One of Ochberg's early recruits was Claire Klein. She was also a genuine orphan, but no pogrom victim. Claire's father had been a wealthy manufacturer of Panama hats. Both her parents had died from typhoid, and she had ended up in an orphanage in Warsaw.
When I met Ochberg, he couldn't speak a word of Polish, and I was born in Poland and speak a perfect Polish. So I helped him out. I used to ride with him, and he was very nice to me. And I was 11 years old, and he said, "Would I like to come to Cape Town, to South Africa?" So I said, "Yes, why not?" So he said, "Have you got somebody younger than you?" I said, "Yes, I've got a brother who's 2 years younger than me." And Anja was the girl, my best friend, whose auntie was in charge of the school, and so he said she could come as well.
By August, Ochberg had assembled 233 children in Warsaw. The next leg of their journey was to be by train to the port of Danzig, but before they could set off, some of the children fell ill and could not be taken, while 37 went missing. Some ran away, frightened of Africa and stories spun by a few of the older ones, of lions and tigers roaming the streets. No one will ever know what befell any of these children, crossed through on their passports. Writing in Yiddish, Ochberg kept a record of what he could find out about his orphans. The murder by Bolsheviks of the father of Manuel Romanovsky, then called Mendel Feldman, is noted, as is the running away of his sister, Chaya, and brother Feivel. 10-year-old Rosa Gerwitz had lost a parent in the Proskurov pogrom. 6-year-old Fega Shrasner had been found lying between her murdered parents in Stanislav. Little Malka Shapira had lost both her parents to hunger or typhus and was left alone without any help. 7-year-old Malka is now known as 94-year-old Molly Cohen.
I am Malka Shapiro, the tiniest of the lot. No head or toe.
On the 19th of August 1921, the children boarded the train in Warsaw to leave behind their European nightmare forever. For some, the leaving was not without its own pain.
You left Europe 86 years ago. You traveled on a group passport. You will see that that little child there was the child that left Europe.
I've never seen this before. I don't look very happy.
Do you you recognize that child?
Very much. How alone we were. Such an unhappy face. Lonely, unhappy, lost, very miserable. And I suppose most of these have already gone. It's past, it's gone.
You've made so much of your life, though, haven't you?
I've tried. I wasn't always successful, but I tried.
My mother was the only grown-up person who saw us off at the station. This is a photograph of my mother, which she gave me on leaving Poland. And she put it into an envelope with her name and address. And I put it into my top pocket of my shirt, because that's how we left Poland. A shirt and a pair of shorts. My mother didn't have a pair of shorts for me, so she took my older brother's shorts, altered it, and gave it to me to go to Africa. She felt that at least one of her children may have a chance in life. She didn't know what chance, she didn't know what's going to happen to me, but she hoped for the best. And that's why she let me go.
A few days after this bittersweet parting, Ochberg's orphans set sail from Gdansk on the SS Baltara, heading to England. On arrival, they were then accommodated for 2 weeks at a hostel in London's East End, literally yards from the famous Bow Bells of the nursery rhyme. Many had come perilously close to living the gruesome last lines of the children's song, supposedly chimed by the great bells of Bow. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. Chip chop, chip chop, the last man's dead.
The first meal they gave us was at the dining room table, which we'd never seen before. And we saw the bread coming, and all the children started grabbing for the bread, because we never saw bread. The first decent meal we had was in London.
The children became minor celebrities. Newspapers were fascinated by the Pogrom Orphans, and depending on the political color of the publisher, the children were variously victims of Bolshevik terror, war, or anti-Semitism. On 2nd September 1921, Ochberg arranged for his party of travellers to be filmed as they left London's Waterloo Station. By now, there were 167 children under the age of 16 and 25 accompanying adults, many of them older siblings. When they boarded the Union Castle Steamship Company's RMS Edinburgh Castle at Southampton, Ochberg made for his first-class cabin, while the others travelled in steerage. Ever the entrepreneur, he had negotiated a 15% discount on the adult fare and a group rate for the children in specially fitted accommodation. The fares for all amounted to more than half the final cost of the entire expedition, which eventually totalled £3,900, 9 shillings and 7 pence, more than $1 million in today's money. For the fundraisers in South Africa, there was an added bonus, as they had raised more than twice that amount, so the surplus could now be applied to the orphans' maintenance in their new homeland.
Meeting of the reception subcommittee of the orphanage held at Mr. Weinberg's house on Sunday, 4th September 1921. In reference to the arrival of Mr. Ochberg and the children from Russia, it was decided that the whole committee be invited to go down to the docks when the boat arrives. Mr. Kadish, on behalf of the orphanage, to officially welcome Mr. Ochberg and the children on arrival.
When we arrived, we thought we were in fairyland. All the lights were on Table Mountain and everything else. And as the lights were getting brighter and later, the people, they rushed to the quayside. They wanted to see what monkeys, Ochberg. Oh, there was a lot of opposition for Ochberg to go and fetch them. So he said, bugger you.
The children were split equally between orphanages in the South African cities of Cape Town and Johannesburg. All were then made available for adoption. But in spite of the enthusiasm and support for Ochberg's project shown by South Africa's Jewish community, surprisingly few children were taken. 6-year-old Solly Neustein made sure he was not one of them.
Jewish people of Johannesburg came along to the orphanage to have a look at the children who arrived from Poland. I don't know what made me do it, but I saw an elderly woman who attracted me. She must have reminded me of my mother, because I went up to her and I grabbed her and I said, Mama. I wouldn't let her go. So she said to me, go and have your supper and we'll take you home. In those days there were no adoption laws. You picked up a dog, you picked up a child, you can take him home. So I wouldn't let her go, and she said to me, well, go and have your supper, and I'll wait for you. I said, no, you'll go away. So she came into the dining room to see me eat. And being of a soft heart, she took me home.
Solly quickly came to regard the Josolowitzes of Johannesburg as his mother and father. 15 years later, he was to receive a letter from his natural mother in Lvov, at that time part of Poland. It was written in Yiddish, with an English translation provided by his mother's neighbor.
10th of December 1936. My dear son, I am always thinking about you, and my only wish is to see you once in my life. We are all quite well. We are working. The life is today everywhere hard. I beg you to be so kind and to write more often. I am a simple woman, quite illiterate, and it is impossible to me to write beautiful letters, but every word is full of love for you, my dear child.
What happened to your mother?
What happened to my mother? My mother was killed by the Nazis. My mother, my sister and her husband and her 2 children were taken away by the Germans on the train. And my mother followed the train, and she got killed following the train.
No graveyard is large enough to contain the innocents murdered in World War II by Hitler's supporters, be they stormtroopers, soldiers or civil servants. And the Jewish graveyards of Belarus, Poland and Ukraine are today mostly sad, sad places. Desecrated, lonely, forgotten. These are the resting places of the forebears of Ochberg's orphans, but they and their descendants were spared the ovens of Auschwitz, Sobibor, Belzec and Majdanek, and are now spread around the globe from Australia to Zimbabwe. As for Isaac Ochberg, in 1922 he again left for Europe to save orphans. But by now the political climate had changed, and it was no longer thought practical or desirable to bring the orphans of Russia to Africa. The best Ochberg could do was arrange to fund an orphanage in Odessa. In the years that followed, he accumulated even greater wealth for himself. But in 1933, tragedy struck. Daddy Ochberg, the surrogate father of nearly 200 Russian children, had had 6 children of his own. 2 died in infancy, 2 others, Lily and Harry, were born with learning difficulties, but his beloved youngest daughter was Ruth. On April the 4th, 1933, the day after this photo was taken, she collapsed and died from an undiagnosed heart disorder, aged just 15. At her grave, her distraught father, who had done so much to help those in need, cried out, "Oh God, don't take my child." From the moment of Ruth's death, his health began to suffer, and 4 years later, while returning from Europe to South Africa, he died at sea from cancer. Today, his grave remains largely forgotten in Cape Town's Jewish cemetery. Molly Cohen, the tiny Malka Shapira, who Ochberg picked up in Sani more than 86 years ago, is now the last Ochberg orphan living in Cape Town.
He not only saved me, but he saved all these children, which to me is a marvelous, wonderful gift, even for one. Now to save so many lives, he is an extraordinary man.
In 1920, Isaac Ochberg dared to dream a dream of saving hundreds of children from a ravaged, war-torn land. Less than a year later, he had made his dream a reality. This unlikely man of action had shown vision, leadership, and bravery. Today, in a 21st century dominated by wars, genocides, and suffering that virtually defy understanding and belief, with tens of millions of displaced peoples and orphaned children, Isaac Ochberg's legacy is a reminder that a small act can make a big difference, and that one should never doubt that a group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has.
Sometimes I'm out here on my own, because then I can talk to myself, which I usually do.
Do you ever get lonely?
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. I did try and take my own life when I was younger. I was thinking things along the lines of I'm not worthy